I've been managing a small warehouse for a tech startup for about 3 years now. It's nothing big, just a quiet little building tucked between two auto shops on a dead-end road. From the outside, you'd never guess it was a warehouse. We don't ship anything major, just our own equipment, in and out. That's why the night shift usually only needs one person. Most nights, it's peaceful. I use the downtime to catch up on paperwork, shipment logs, inventory reports, the usual stuff. But one night not long ago, things started to take a strange turn. It was raining hard that night. The kind of rain that comes down in sheets and turns the whole parking lot into a mirror. I was in the back office with a warm cup of coffee and a stack of delivery sheets when I heard something. Not from inside, but from the front entrance. A dull, steady thumping. I paused, stood up, and walked across the dim warehouse floor. Through the glass doors, I saw 3 men standing outside. All 3 were soaked to the bone. One of them was pressing both hands against the door while the others loomed behind him, swaying slightly like they were having trouble staying upright. The one in front slammed his palm against the glass and cupped his hands around his face to look inside. "Hey, open up, man." I stood firm a few feet away and motioned toward the sign taped to the inside. "No public access. We're closed. You need to leave," I said clearly. One of the others stepped forward, eyes squinting through the rain. "Just let us wait out the rain, bro. We're not gonna do anything. Go home," I said. "You're not coming in." There was a moment of stillness. Then one of them, the one who had shouted first, kicked the bottom of the door in frustration. But they all turned and stumbled off into the dark parking lot. I waited a minute, just watching, then went back to work. Probably just 3 drunk guys caught in the storm. The next night they came again. No rain this time, just a heavy sky thick with clouds. I was logging shipment confirmations when I heard a knock. There they were again, standing in front of the glass doors. Silent this time, just standing and staring. I didn't even approach the entrance. I stepped out into the open so they could see me, pointed at the sign again, and crossed my arms. They didn't yell, didn't kick the door this time either. They just stared for a while and walked away. On the 3rd night, the clouds still hung low over the building. No rain, but it felt like it could fall any minute. They returned once more. Same time, same place, same cold silence. This time I stepped closer to the door and raised my voice. "If you come here again, there's going to be a problem. Leave now." They didn't argue. They didn't speak at all. They just turned and walked off. For a few days after that, everything was quiet again. I figured they'd finally gotten the message. But a week later, just after midnight, I heard something different. It wasn't a knock. It was a solid thud. A sound that echoed just slightly through the back end of the building. I stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and made my way toward the loading dock. Nothing inside was out of place. No fallen crates, no scattered boxes. But then I looked at the back door. It was metal, solid, no windows. I walked up to it and checked the handle. Still locked, but something told me someone had been there, listening. I decided to check the camera footage from the rear lot. As manager, it was within my call. The back lot camera took a moment to load, but when it did, the footage sent a chill through me. There they were, all 3 of them, standing silently at the back door. One of them had his ear pressed against the metal. Another kept lightly trying the handle. The third just stood a few feet back, still and distant, as if he wasn't really with the others at all. Enough was enough. I wasn't about to let this go on any longer. I called in 2 of my day shift workers who lived nearby and could be trusted. They were quick to respond when I explained the situation. When they arrived, I didn't waste time. It was raining again by then, not as heavy as that first night, but enough to drench your jacket in a minute. We moved around the outside of the building in silence. Under the yellow security lights, we crossed the back lot. And just like before, there they were, the three of them, huddled near the back entrance, not noticing us until we were nearly on top of them. "Hey!" I shouted. They spun around, startled. Two of them bolted immediately, slipping on the wet concrete as they ran off into the night. But the third wasn't quick enough, the one who'd been pressing his ear to the door. We grabbed him. One of the workers, clearly furious, gave him a hard slap. "What the hell are you doing here every night?" he demanded. The guy was drenched and smelled like stale liquor. He mumbled something, eyes darting around like he was trying to piece together where he was. "Hold it," I said, pushing the worker back. "No hitting." The drunk guy blinked slowly. Then, seeing the opening, shoved himself away from us and took off down the alley. We ran after him, but the rain made the ground slick, and he vanished between the buildings before we could catch him. We stood there in the rain for a moment, catching our breath. That was the last time I ever saw any of them. In the days that followed, I had the locks changed, reinforced the back door, and installed 2 more cameras covering every angle of the building. We haven't had a single incident since. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe it really was just shelter from the rain. Maybe it wasn't. But I do know one thing. You don't keep coming back night after night, without a word, without trying to explain, just to stay dry. I was a fresh-faced graduate just out of high school during that final summer before I left for the University of Texas. To make sure I had a full wallet for the small things in life, I took a construction job despite already having a full scholarship for my first 2 years of college. For the most part, the other men on the crew were friendly and entertaining. It was a rare day that passed without us being doubled over in laughter because of something someone had done or said. 2 of the workers, Mark and Daniel, were exceptionally funny and had been working together on various sites for the past 15 years. They were both top-grade practical jokers, but Mark had a tendency to take things a little too far. Daniel was most often the target of this humor, which created a constant source of tension between the two, even if they usually made up by the time we clocked out. As anyone might expect, eventually Mark's joking was going to go too far for Daniel to overlook. That specific day happened to fall during my final week on the job. For some time, everyone on the site had noticed that Daniel wasn't acting like himself. He spent long periods away from the group talking on his phone, and when he was around, he seemed constantly agitated. His usual happy-go-lucky manner had completely disappeared. We all tried our best to make him laugh, but nothing seemed to work, not even Mark's antics. As the days went on, the collective theory on the site was that his troubles involved his girlfriend. When Mark heard these rumors, he couldn't stop himself from poking at that particular sore spot. On this day, Daniel had gone off to talk on the phone again. When he returned, Mark immediately started joking around, asking Daniel what was wrong and if he was having troubles at home. Mark went as far as to suggest that Daniel's lady was seeing the mailman while he was away at work. These verbal jabs only served to annoy Daniel further. He said nothing in response, instead choosing to stare at Mark as if he were trying to burn holes through him with his eyes. Mark wasn't going to let Daniel's bad mood get in the way of getting a laugh from the rest of the crew. After lunch and throughout the remainder of the day, Mark continued with his jokes. Daniel, who was usually the type of guy to say something when he was fed up, held his tongue the entire day. I knew that if Daniel didn't put a stop to the poking soon, Mark would take things too far and cause a serious problem, perhaps even a fight. Daniel was clearly in no mood to let the remarks roll off his back. As quitting time arrived, I felt myself relax, assuming Mark would finally let up. Unfortunately, things were about to get much worse. It was finally time to head home. We were going around the site, picking up our tools and cleaning up any trash we had left behind. Everyone was focused on their own tasks. I was off in my own little world, thinking about the last-minute things I needed to accomplish before leaving for school. When the work was complete, we all stood around discussing our plans for the upcoming weekend. It had been a while since Mark had made any jokes, and I assumed he had finished for the day. When it was his turn to speak, he looked very serious and told the group that since Daniel was going fishing, he thought he would go over to Daniel's place to spend some time with his lady. The joke took all of us by complete surprise, and the crew fell over themselves laughing. Everyone laughed except for Daniel. I saw a snarl appear across his face, and his teeth were gritted so tightly it looked like they might crumble at any second. Daniel shouted that he was sick of the stupid jokes. No sooner had the words left his mouth than he stepped forward with his hammer drawn back. I was standing dangerously close to Mark at the time, and stumbled back so quickly that I fell onto my butt. I looked up just as Daniel brought the claw end of the hammer down into Mark's skull. Mark immediately fell over and began seizing, writhing around on the floor. I was in total shock and remained frozen where I was. I watched Daniel to see what his next move would be. He stood over Mark's convulsing body for a moment, simply surveying his handiwork. I felt a wave of relief when he calmly walked over to a bench and just sat down. I don't think I could have moved even if he had come at me. Just like me, the other guys were frozen in place, watching as Mark's body slowly came to a limp halt. We all looked at each other, too terrified to speak. Daniel was the one who finally broke the silence. He told us in a resigned voice that we should probably call the cops and that he wasn't going to run off because he was just a little fed up. The resignation in his voice showed just how far gone he truly was. The old Daniel I knew would never have done anything like this. We did exactly as he asked, and he didn't give the police any trouble when they arrived to take him away. I thought the shock was just affecting me in that moment, but even now, years later, I don't feel anything but sorry for Daniel. It would come out later just how bad things had been going for him at home. His girlfriend had cheated on him more than once and had blamed the entire situation on him. He had been working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep her happy and keep up with their expenses. He was neck deep in love and too blind to realize what was happening until it had already occurred. After everything he did to give her what she wanted, she had the nerve to complain about him being gone at work so much. When he was on the job, all he could think about was whether she was with another man at that very moment. He was too private of a person to share any of that struggle with us. I don't think Mark had any idea what was truly occurring in Daniel's private life. He took a shot, and when he saw that he had hit a nerve, he decided to ride it into the ground. Mark did that a lot, and this turned out to be one time too many. I'm still in shock sometimes when I think about how quickly life left Mark's body during those last few convulsing moments. All of us offered to serve as character witnesses for Daniel, but it turned out not to be necessary. A deal was struck, and Daniel agreed to serve 15 years in prison. He has been offered parole in the intervening years, but has declined it every time. With his release date soon approaching, I hope he is able to get his life back together and move beyond the shadow of what I suppose you could call a crime of passion. I have saved the most important person in the story for last. Mark's story obviously ended on that job site. Some readers might wonder why Daniel received so much sympathy while Mark received so little. The truth is that although Mark was a very funny guy, that was about the only thing he had going for him. I already mentioned how far he would push Daniel with his joking. These days, people would likely call it bullying, and I believe they would be right. He didn't just do that to Daniel, either. Not a single person on the crew evaded his comedic jabs. However, that was far from his worst trait. Even around a group of East Texas rednecks, Mark's racism was off-putting, just like with his jokes. Not a single culture was off limits, and he wasn't afraid to say exactly what he thought. I won't even get into his views on women, other than to say that Mark was simply not a good person. Funny people tend to get away with things that the rest of us can't. However, even when you are making people laugh, there is a line. And unfortunately for Mark, he crossed it one time too many.
This happened a few years back when I had just been hired at a local grocery store in my city. I was 16 at the time, and definitely looked my age, if not even a bit younger. It is important to mention that I am quite a shy person by nature, and I was especially quiet back then while trying to navigate my very first workplace. I had been working there for a short while when the store hired a new cashier. For the sake of this story, I will call him Joseph. In the beginning, Joseph seemed like a perfectly nice person. He was always waving hello to the rest of the staff, and made an effort to greet everyone at the start of his shift. He seemed to fit in quite well, appearing to be just a normal guy who was trying his best to befriend his new co-workers. After Joseph had been working at the store for a few months, he started trying to talk to me more frequently. At first, this did not seem strange to me. Cashiers often get close to the people they frequently work shifts with, and it is always nice to have someone to chat with when the store gets quiet. However, things escalated rather quickly. Joseph began going out of his way to talk to me every single chance he got. I still assumed he was just being friendly, since he was relatively new to the team. This perspective changed one day, as I was finishing my shift. As I was exiting the store, Joseph approached me and asked if I would like to go out for coffee with him. I was caught completely off guard. Because I was such a shy and anxious person, I stammered out an agreement and said sure, though I immediately regretted it. I had zero attraction to Joseph. I quickly ran out of the store to where my parents were waiting to pick me up, feeling a sense of dread. When I got home that day, I searched for his profile on Facebook to see if I could find out more about him. It turned out that Joseph was not as young as I had originally assumed. He was 26 years old at the time. It was a well-known fact among the staff that I and several other cashiers were still in high school. Knowing that I was not going to entertain the idea of a date with him, I approached him the next day at work. I told him that I would not be able to get coffee with him because the age difference was simply too much for me. Unfortunately, this did not seem to deter Joseph at all. He simply dismissed my concern, telling me that age did not matter to him and asking if it really mattered to me. I tried to explain that it mattered quite a bit considering he was almost 30 and I was still a student in high school. He seemed to ignore my comment entirely, stating that he would wait for me and claiming he could make me happy. This interaction obviously creeped me out. From that point on, I began to avoid Joseph as best as I could. Despite my efforts, he became very persistent. Every single shift I had, he seemed to be there. He would even go through my checkout lane to buy a single item just so he could pester me for a date. He asked me almost daily if I had changed my mind and repeatedly told me that he was not going to give up. To some, this might not seem like much, but being harassed daily by an older man in a place where I was supposed to be safe was terrifying. I admit that if this happened today, I would go straight to HR or a manager to report the situation. However, as a 16-year-old girl at her first job, I was afraid that I was just overreacting. Eventually, after a couple of months of being genuinely scared to go to work, I finally confided in a friend I worked with. This friend was a very tall man who told me he would speak to Joseph about his creepy behavior. Around the same time, I also spoke to one of Joseph's closer friends at the store about how his behavior was upsetting me. Shortly after these conversations, Joseph began to leave me alone, and not long after that, he left the job entirely. I had actually begun to forget the entire ordeal until about a year or so ago. I received a message from an old work friend I don't talk to very often. She asked if I had seen a specific post and included a link. The link led to a mugshot from the local Crime Stoppers unit. It was a photo of Joseph. Underneath the image, it stated that there was a province-wide warrant out for his arrest. He was being charged with the possession and distribution of illicit images containing children. I do not know what I avoided by refusing that coffee date, and I cannot say for certain that something terrible would have happened that day. However, I am incredibly glad that my internal warning bells went off when they did.
Getting entangled in office politics is an experience many professionals share, often finding themselves the target of a scheme before they even realize a game is being played. It is a common reality in the modern workplace, and I am certainly no exception. I eventually fell victim to the toxic environment created by a particularly deceitful coworker. While I have always believed it is vital to emotionally separate our personal feelings about colleagues from the requirements of the job, not everyone possesses that level of maturity. Those who cannot make that distinction often end up becoming a source of poison within an organization. This particular chapter of my life took place when I was working at a supervisor level for a construction firm. Most people have an internal radar for when someone dislikes them. It is a subtle, instinctual vibration. I had an assistant named Joshua who consistently gave off that energy. Every time he spoke to me or stood in my vicinity, I could see a deep-seated loathing in his eyes, his voice, and his guarded body language. For a long time, I didn't let it bother me. I accepted that everyone is entitled to their own opinion of their peers. I was a relatively strict supervisor when it came to site safety and productivity, so I assumed his resentment stemmed from my management style. While his attitude was a minor annoyance, I never allowed it to compromise my professional performance. However, I eventually realized that dismissing a colleague's growing resentment was one of the most significant professional blunders I ever made. I mistakenly believed that a junior employee's dislike couldn't actually hurt me. I should have addressed it the very first time he spoke back to me with disrespect. Instead, I let it slide. On a subsequent occasion, when he committed a serious error on site, I went as far as to scold him privately but take the full blame in front of senior management. I did this out of a misplaced sense of mentorship, fearing he would be fired if the truth came out. Looking back, I realized that protecting him only emboldened his behavior. My routine involved arriving at the construction site several minutes before the shift began. Because my role required me to travel and inspect various satellite locations, I frequently had to delegate the supervision of the main site to Joshua. One afternoon, while I was occupied at a remote location, my manager called me in a state of frustration. He informed me that a significant problem had developed at the main site, and more importantly, there was no supervisor present to handle it. This confused me because I had specifically instructed Joshua to be there. In fact, I had called him that very morning, and he had explicitly confirmed that he was on site and everything was running smoothly. This wasn't the first time I had arrived to find mountains of unfinished work despite his assurances, but I had stubbornly refused to believe he was being intentionally negligent. I dropped everything and rushed to the main site to resolve the crisis. After fixing the issue and enduring a harsh reprimand from the manager for the lapse in oversight, I attempted to call Joshua. His phone was disconnected. It wasn't until the following evening that I received a brief text message from him claiming he had an urgent matter that forced him to leave the site early. It was clear to me then that someone had tipped him off about the manager's phone call. I felt a surge of frustration. Despite the numerous times I had covered for his mistakes and shielded him from consequences, he was still slacking off and actively putting my career at risk. The situation escalated when I happened to overhear a group of co-workers whispering in the break room. They were discussing a plot Joshua had devised to get me fired so that he could move up and take my position. Given that he was my direct assistant and the most logical successor, the motive made perfect sense. I didn't hesitate. I stepped into the room and interrupted their conversation to ask for the full story. Caught off guard, they admitted that Joshua had tried to recruit them into his plan to undermine my authority. They quickly assured me they had no intention of helping him, and I told them that as long as they remained silent about our conversation, I would let the matter drop with them. At that point, I was finished being the nice boss. His reckless behavior and blatant betrayal required a firm response. I decided it was time to demonstrate exactly who held the authority in our professional relationship. I spent the week crafting a plan to expose his dishonesty, choosing the upcoming weekend for the execution because we were scheduled for 12-hour shifts, the perfect window to catch him in a lie. On Friday, I intentionally gave Joshua false information. I told him that I would be away all weekend inspecting a different site, and that he was solely responsible for supervising the high-priority main site. This was a trap. In reality, the company had designated the main site as the top priority for the weekend, and had specifically ordered both of us to be there for constant supervision. Joshua, unaware of the actual orders from the front office, believed he had a free pass to skip work while I was away. On Saturday morning, I arrived at the site 4 hours early, while the gates were still locked and the grounds were empty. Shortly after the shift was supposed to begin, Joshua actually called me first. With an air of confidence, he lied directly to my face, claiming he had just arrived at the site and was currently overseeing the crew. I was standing in the very spot he claimed to be, looking at an empty field. To build my case, I asked the security guards to assist me. I had them walk the perimeter with me while videotaping the empty supervisor's station to prove he was absent. I also made sure to record every phone call we had throughout the day. Every time I checked in, he doubled down on the lie, insisting he was busy working on site. On Monday morning, I decided to give him one final opportunity to be honest. I sat him down and asked him directly if he had covered the site over the weekend as instructed. Without a hint of hesitation, he claimed he had been there the entire time. It was his last chance to come clean, and perhaps save his job, but his fixation on taking my position blinded him to the reality of the situation. At that moment, I knew I had to follow through with the evidence I had gathered. Since I did not have the direct authority to fire him myself, I compiled the video footage, the call recordings, and the statements from the security guards, and submitted a formal report to the HR department. I also disclosed the history of his previous lies that I had foolishly covered up in the past. The company launched a swift investigation, and within a week, Joshua was terminated. I made sure to thank the other coworkers who had alerted me to his plans. That experience changed my management philosophy forever. I learned that while being a supportive boss is important, letting mistakes slide out of a sense of kindness can often be a fatal mistake. You may think you are helping someone get ahead, but they might just be planning your downfall.
That morning, I woke up with a pounding, persistent headache that enveloped my entire head. The pain felt absolutely unbearable, so I made the decision to call in sick to get some much-needed rest. However, my boss, who is typically very lenient, chose to be uncharacteristically strict and insisted that I report to work on time. Although I felt a surge of frustration, I had no choice but to obey his order. I climbed out of bed and began preparing for the shift with an immense amount of effort. I took a shower, put on my uniform, and applied my makeup. But I moved through these motions with practically zero energy. Before I left my house, I swallowed a few aspirin to dull the pain, desperately hoping it would help me survive the day ahead. While I was on my way to the airport, I decided that I would cause a disturbance once I arrived at work. I planned to attribute my poor performance to my physical condition and my boss's refusal to grant me a day off. Upon arriving at the airport, I shot an exasperated, pointed glare in my boss's direction, but he chose to completely ignore me. This lack of reaction only intensified my boiling frustration. However, just as the very last passenger boarded their flight, my boss suddenly knelt on one knee in front of me and produced a stunning diamond ring. The sight of that ring instantly melted away every ounce of anger I had been feeling. He asked me if I would make him the happiest man on earth by agreeing to marry him. I began nodding my head with immense vigor as soon as those words left his lips. He slipped that beautiful piece of jewelry onto my ring finger before standing up to pull me into a nice, juicy kiss. I sighed with profound relief that I hadn't skipped work that day, finally understanding why he had been so insistent that I come in. Sam and I had been in a relationship for quite a while. Despite the fact that he is a pilot, we always refrained from displaying any outward affection toward each other in public, preferring to act lovey-dovey. only in the privacy of our home. During work hours, he treats me exactly the same way as any other flight attendant, which could sometimes feel quite hurtful. But I always understood the professional reason behind his behavior. Still, the way he surprised me with that proposal made me incredibly happy. I had never really envisioned a dream proposal, but the way he chose to do it was so profoundly romantic that it made me fall in love with him all over again. After the incredibly romantic proposal and receiving countless heartfelt congratulations from my co-workers and the awestruck passengers, we resumed our duties. I found myself happily whistling to the tune of Lover by Taylor Swift. To my complete surprise, my persistent headache had disappeared entirely, as though it had never existed in the first place. While I was assisting a passenger, I noticed a man sitting behind her who looked to be in his late 30s. He clutched his suitcase with such an intense, desperate grip that it looked as though it contained a piece of his very soul. The sight struck me as inherently suspicious, and I could not help but wonder what exactly could be hidden inside that bag. I approached him and politely requested that he please put his bag in the overhead locker. The man turned his gaze toward me with a cold and deeply unfriendly expression, as if my simple request had somehow personally offended him. I repeated my request in a calm, steady tone, hoping to avoid any potential confrontation. Unfortunately, he remained stubbornly silent, which left me feeling frustrated and unsure of how to proceed. Just as I was turning to leave, he whispered something that immediately caught my full attention. He told me to do exactly what he said, or he would blow up the entire plane. I stared at him in complete disbelief, scanning his thin frame from head to toe. He looked like he was made of nothing but skin and bones, and the expression on his face did not seem like the kind someone would make while pulling a cruel prank. I tried to ignore him, convincing myself he was just muttering to himself, but then he provided a quick, frightening sneak peek inside his suitcase, which contained a tangle of red wires and something that looked unmistakably like a bomb. I was filled with absolute shock and paralyzing fear when he threatened me to stay quiet and handed me a written note intended for the captain. My heart began thumping uncontrollably against my ribs, and my eyes widened in response to the sudden, deadly threat. It was supposed to be the most joyous day of my life, but instead, this was slowly morphing into a terrifying nightmare as I felt helpless, scared, and deeply confused. As I stood there, frozen in the aisle, my legs began to tremble with overwhelming fear, similar to the way a venomous snake might slowly creep up on its prey. I walked toward the cockpit, and as soon as Sam noticed me, he immediately looked concerned and began asking me what was wrong. That was the moment I handed him the note from the mysterious man. Both he and the co-pilot gave me a deeply puzzled look before unfolding and reading the message. The man had requested a hefty sum of ransom money, along with a parachute, clearly stating that he would detonate the device if his demands were denied. In a moment of extreme tension and mortal danger, the captain approached the man with remarkable calm. He made a request that would ultimately determine the fate of everyone on board. He asked the man to deactivate the bomb before jumping off the plane. Surprisingly, the man agreed to comply. With the full support of the crew, we began collecting money from every passenger to fulfill his demand. It was a desperate, collective attempt to save our lives, and every member of our team contributed whatever cash they had on hand, hoping that it would be enough to secure a chance for our survival. The moment the man prepared to jump off after supposedly defusing the bomb, the captain knocked him unconscious with a single swift punch. Honestly, I wasn't surprised in the slightest, given how bony and frail the man had appeared. Upon a closer inspection of the suitcase, it looked a bit suspicious. After the plane landed safely, and the man was taken into police custody, the bag was sent for a thorough inspection, where it turned out the device was completely fake. Subsequently, the man confessed that he and his spouse had conspired to commit these deeds because they were exhausted from being heavily indebted. Furthermore, As a more detailed inquiry was conducted, it was brought to light that he had perpetrated numerous burglaries, with his wife serving as the mastermind behind each of these illicit acts. He was later sentenced to 17 years in prison for his past crimes, including many counts of conspiracy, and 13 additional years for his felony of attempted aircraft hijacking. Sam told me that the penalty for hijacking a plane is typically a death sentence, but because no one was harmed, and because he did not actually intend to harm anyone, given he was carrying a fake bomb, the judge took pity on him. The day I got proposed to was a literal roller coaster of emotions. I never anticipated experiencing such an intense whirlwind of drama and fear, but it was still the best and worst day of my life. Thankfully, I haven't encountered any similar situations since then, and I am now eagerly counting down the days until my wedding in just 2 short months.